The death of Dick Cheney gives us a good opportunity to remind ourselves that Americans are not very good at evaluating evidence. Dick Cheney was an unindicted war criminal. He should have been charged, he should have been tried, and he should have been convicted for the invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was a complete false pretense. The evidence was concocted. It was all a lie. It was pushed by Condi Rice, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Colin Powell. Colin Powell claims he was duped. He wasn't capable of evaluating evidence. Meanwhile, the rest of the world knew. We all knew that there was no connection between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein. We all knew that Al Qaeda and the Taliban were not in Iraq. We all knew after Hans Blix went and had inspected facilities in Iraq that there was no weapons of mass destruction. There was no nuclear program in Iraq. As far as biological weapons are concerned, you can whoop those up in about 6 weeks in any modern society. Same with chemical weapons. There was nothing to suggest that there was any weapons of mass destruction. Yet, for some reason, Americans were so easily duped by these guys just coming out and saying, well, there's weapons of mass destruction. And the rest of the world, we weren't duped. Okay, in Canada, we looked at it, each individual. We looked at Colin Powell's presentation to the UN and said to ourselves, this is bullshit, like there's nothing there. Our federal government in Canada looked at it, the Conservatives, the Republican Party of Canada essentially, looked at it and said, well, we buy into it, and if it was we were in charge, we would be there alongside of the US and Great Britain invading in Iraq. But our federal government was a liberal government, Jean Chrétien, smart enough to look at it and say, this is bullshit. There's no evidence there to justify it. Now, he managed to get away with it. This is an issue of the rule of law not applying to everybody, right? It's one of the biggest threats that you have in any society where you claim that the rule of law applies. Colin Powell stood there in front of the UN and gave this presentation that was filled with lies, and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and Condi Rice were all behind it, and Dick Cheney was the one who was really pushing for it. And in the end, hundreds of thousands of people died and people's lives were destroyed on this false pretense invasion, yet he managed to avoid any justice. He died without ever facing justice. Why? Because the rule of law does not apply to certain elites in the U.S. Look at Donald Trump. Okay, Donald Trump is a criminal. He committed sex crimes against children. He's a pedo, and his victims were teenage girls that he was linked up to through Epstein. And that's the reason. That's the reason he had teen beauty pageants, okay? This was the thing that he was into. And rational people can look at it and say, yeah, this is what he was. The guy's a fraud artist. He managed to avoid going to jail for fraud. He committed all sorts of other crimes over the years that he's managed to go to not be charged or convicted of. We know that he's sexually assaulted women. We know that. Yet somehow he's managed to avoid any justice for any of these things. Even the fact that he was convicted of 34 felonies, there was no punishment for him in the end. The fact that he has, victimized children. The entire U.S. government is shut down right now. The U.S. Congress is shut down to protect his reputation. Not that he's going to get charged with it. He's never going to get charged with it. But to protect just his reputation about the fact, to hide the fact that he victimized children. So does the rule of law apply to those people in those high levels with that kind of money or with that kind of political clout, connections, threat level? No, it clearly doesn't, because Dick Cheney managed to avoid ever facing any justice for the crimes that he was behind. And now we have Donald Trump. And because the American people in both circumstances are just incapable of assessing evidence, and I know that there's plenty of Americans who can, but generally as a population, and certainly your elected officials, are so either deeply embedded, so entrenched in their positions that they don't want to risk anything, or they are just incapable of assessing evidence. And as a consequence, you've got a criminal president who's destroying the world order and destroying the U.S. economy and destroying the lives of hundreds of thousands of millions of people, simply because Americans are not capable of assessing evidence. Now, why is this? Go a little bit deeper. And I suspect it's because of the failure to adequately educate people with respect to science and the focus on religion. Because what is religion? It's accepting something without any evidence. There's no evidence of a God. You believe it in faith. The whole idea of faith is that you accept that something exists despite the fact that there's no evidence or counter evidence. There is nothing that religion has revealed to us. Science reveals things to us each and every day. Yet, despite this, we've got people who believe in magical sky creature and who operate their lives on the belief that magical sky creature is somehow involved in their lives. And they do this despite the fact that all of the evidence is against this. They've just been taught to believe myths and lies and not assess evidence. I think this is the fundamental problem that they continue to address, but it is manifest in a failure of their society to be able to hold people to account for crimes. Dick Cheney deserved to be tried, deserved to face the evidence, despite his emphatic denials of anybody who claims that the evidence was manufactured. It was all manufactured. The emphatic denials don't change a damn thing. Guy should have been jailed. He gets a bit of a break from people because in the end he recognized the damage that he caused, and essentially creating the conditions that allowed Donald Trump to end up in power, despite the fact that he recognized that this was destructive for the U.S. But regardless. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the death of Dick Cheney, and again, speaking a little bit more about the incapacity, inability, the failure of Americans to be able to assess evidence before them, and how this is manifest in undermining the rule of law in the U.S. and their justice system and their society.